everybody. Now I will show you how to drape all those pieces for that top or dress with the princess line that has a yoke on the top. I had sent you the calico measurements that you prepared, so you should have 6 different pieces, 3 for the front and 3 for the back. The front piece is the center front, we have a side front and then the yoke. And the same for the back, we have the center back, the side back, and then the yoke piece. So I hope I have prepared everything accordingly, and so let's just jump into that adventure and do our next project. So best would be if I move the dress form a little closer so you have a really great close-up to see, but not my head though, which is not that important. But what I wanted to also emphasize is the bust line, and you can also see the center front. We have the princess seam here, and we have the side seam. So those are the most important seams that we need for this project. Let me get it right here. So the first piece that we will work on will be our center front, and it is kind of that long rectangular piece that I also marked my 2.5 centimeter part here. I flipped it over and pressed it, so this is the usual what we always do. And the first step that we do is we put the center front onto our dress form here with some pins. So mark, like be very careful to have that line that we marked 10 centimeters down from the top, that it is right on our bust line here. And we want to be very precise, and also be very precise about the center front. Because if you remember, this dress it does not have a seam in the center, so this is only a fold. So if you are not precise with that fold, that center piece in the end, it will be about this wide, will be way too wide or way too small. So we want to avoid that. I usually pin only 2 or 3 points here, so let's do 3. And again, I have my pins really like in a very steep angle this way, so I can pull on that side a little bit better. So the next piece that we will use now is our side front. And this is the long piece here that has kind of a line almost centered here. So you have a top part that is also with that line crossing over in 10 centimeters depth here. So we want to have that in combination with our front, with our center front piece. And the, how do I explain that? So what we want to create here is the princess seam. And in order to do it, I will fold this over a little bit, and I will look at my dress form. So I have my princess seam going down here over the high point to the waist, and I have my side seam, and that is always sticking out a little bit. So what I want to do now with my side panel, I will level it on my bust line here. So the black is on the black, same what I did basically in the front, and I will center it left and right, so it is right centered between my princess seam and my side seam. So I have a size 12, 12 dress form here, so this just about right. So if you have a bigger dress form, you might need a little wider side piece here. And then I will pin it near my side seam. I will just check that it's really kind of centered over. And then I will also put pin here, maybe in halfway over. And what I want to do on this side, on the princess seam now, is I want to connect those two pieces. The way to connect it is that the center piece itself is basically just hanging straight down. We don't want to really match it or press it down on the dress form too much, because let's say the dress form is exactly my size, and then there is no room to breathe. So I want that room, you know, I need a little extra. So what I want to do now is have my center piece. Let me also put another pin here on my seam to make sure that it's really perfect. So I keep the center piece basically almost straight, and I shape my side panel. So that is, it's kind of a little tricky to explain, but if you curve it around the dress form, the curve should be mainly on this side panel, not on the center panel. So let me just do it, and then you see what I mean. So this is straight, and that whole shaping happens on this side. And then I kind of grab both of those pieces. One is way longer than the other one, and that is really, it depends on which size dress form you have. So if you have a smaller size, you have plenty of fabric left and right. If you have a bigger one, it might be a little tighter. One is way longer than the other one, and which doesn't matter, you know, really. So I will put those together along the princess seam. And I will not pin it into my dress form, I just pin those two pieces of fabric together so that I can also lift it off later on. So I put another pin on the high point here. And then as we go down, think about that we want to have it a little loose. My goal is to make a dress out of it. So I don't want to have it too tight. For a top with an opening, a zipper or some buttons and whatnot, you can make it really tight, but I want to have it kind of just as a slip-on, loose-fitting dress, but I want to have those seams. So. And I just go basically straight down here, shaping my side piece, not the center piece so much. Always have in mind that my princess seam is the goal, where I want to be in the end. So when you look at your connection here, when you just look at the center piece, this should be basically straight. So if I look where my pins are and I just go down with my fingers, so the pins are about the same width from my center. On the other side, when I look at the pins on my side panel, you see that it's really curvy here. So it really curves around. What we also want to keep having is this line here, and that is our helping line, that this falls straight down. This is our grain line. So I see that it is a little tilting towards the center here, so I will make this a little bigger, pull it over a little more, maybe just 1/4 of an inch, because I really want to keep this straight down. So this is vertical. So, and that looks pretty good. So I can fill more pins in if I wanted, but I think I'm pretty fine with that. So this is basically our first step. So we look at that, how it hangs, where it is, where the connection is. Am I here on the princess seam? Is the princess seam down there? Exactly. Maybe I need another pin. It's way longer than the waist. Let's put another pin here. Double check. Good. Yep, I like that. So then our next step would be to look at our armhole here. So to kind of make that a little rounder and get this extra piece, you know, that flips around. So it doesn't lay really nicely because we have that extra fabric around the armhole. So that's why I kind of cut this off. If you want to have a very tight armhole, like leave about 1 or 1.5 centimeter of seam allowance towards your armhole, and then you can cut little snips in there so it is really laying around, and that's what we do now. And later on we will define how wide we really want our armhole to be. So that is the next step. But just for now, I cut basically this in and do little snips as I go. I always go over and then I do a little snip. And then I do the rest. And that way I can really manipulate my fabric nicely around the armhole. I can put my, press it in with my fingernail. So I see that the snip is going right where the metal ends. And this is really only for now. We have not defined the armhole yet. So our next step will then be the yoke. And that is our piece here, the front yoke. I already had marked and pressed my 2.5 centimeter piece in the center. So where do we want to position this now? So as you see, I have a neck point and you have a neck point. I marked it a little with a little strip here. You usually have a little pin in there, or it is basically where our neck seam meets the center front seam. So this point here, and just think about a horizontal line, and this is where this line should be. So we pin it in the center front. Again, same thing as we had before, center front. And with the center front, I'm always really precise. I want it to be really perfect. And then I also put one up here. So you press it down a little bit. So then you can see that our neckline, we have plenty of fabric up here, but it doesn't really lay down very nicely because of that extra that goes around the neckline. So we can do something very similar what we just did at the armhole line. We can go around here and with our scissors make little snips, like maybe a centimeter above our neck seam, and then little snips downwards. as I go, I always press it down and see where I am and where I need to go with my scissors. And as you go, you see how nicely that whole fabric lays down around the neck towards the shoulder. So that's very pretty here. So we double check our line here is very, like, it's horizontal, it's parallel to our bust line, and the neckline really lays nice and flat. So then we look at our connection line here between our center front, the side front, and our yoke in the front. So what we want to have is a perfect, like a straight line, like also very parallel to all this. And that's what we do, same thing what we did with the side here. So we will use this as a reference, the end part of our yoke, and then lift up that fabric that we had in the front. And I'll remove the center pin here for a second. And the same thing what I did with the side, I pin one piece of calico to the other one. I don't pin it into my dress form now. And that helps me when I take it off the dress form, that I really see where I am, you know, and pieces are connected. So this is my first one. Then I go over, I always try to have this top panel, this is my reference. So the top panel is the reference, and that should be parallel to my line here. So I take the next one, which is, the pin is a little too high. So I move that pin from my side panel, center panel, a little further down. So then I can connect my yoke piece right there. And it's a little tricky to do because you handle like 3 pieces of calico at the same time here. And it seems very crowded. Let's just go one pin after the other. That's my second pin, and then it gets a little weird towards the armhole again because we have not shaped the armhole yet for the yoke piece. Also, always check that the yoke has a very straight line here. So I have 3 pins in here now. You can see, so basically I show the seams, you know, they are all towards the outside. It looks a little weird, but once you clipped away the extra fabric and maybe baste everything together, then you can see how really nicely it falls. And then after basting, you can also try it on and see if the size, if everything works well. So now we are again near my armhole. I'll turn it around, and I do basically the same what I did for the side panel here. I continue doing the same for the top, for the yoke. Pin this here. So I use my, you know, I use the same seam allowance, go about 1 centimeter over the metal here, and start clipping and snipping. And clipping, and then snipping. And it's tricky because you might say, oh, I don't see anything, you know, like, yeah, I don't see anything either, but you can feel it. You know, you can really, when you press down the fabric, you can feel where the metal starts, and you want to be about 1 finger width over the metal. That's about a centimeter. So, and again, you know, everything lays really nice, and the yoke should be very, very like tight around here. What you want to have a little looser is the side and the front panel, because that's where, you know, you want to the movement and where you want a little extra space. So this is basically our front part that we leave the way it is right now. We still have the shoulder seam to do and the side seam, but that we will do as after we've done the back side. So for that I will turn around to the back and start with the same that we did before with my center back. I also marked and pressed the 2.5 centimeter center fold here. And again, I will look at my bust line that I extended all the way around in the back, because in the front it's very easy to find because it's where the high points are, but in the back you usually don't have that. You might have a little pin in there, but I wanted to exaggerate and put the tape around so it's easier to see. So I put my black line on my black tape here, and I am very precise about the center so that my center back is really on my center seam. And again, it's important because in the end there is no seam, there is only a fold in the fabric, so it should be really precise. I'm not going that far. I'm going about, you know, looking where my princess seam is. So that's what I want to the princess seam is always the connection to my center. Okay, so I have defined my center, and should have that further up. It's not folding over so much. So this is my center back, and the next piece is my side. The side piece that has the marking lengthwise, you know, kind of centered, and then also the 10 centimeter from the top down to that bust line. So I turn it around a little bit like this. So what we want to look at now is our side seam and our princess seam. And we want to have this panel about centered here. And really like look that you have the same extra fabric on the right and the left side. So it's just in the middle of those two seams. And it should be right on our bust line. That's important. So I will put a few pins in there that hold it right on the bust line here. And maybe one on top so that it hangs right, and then I can work on those two seams. So in the front we only worked on the princess seam, in the back we will work on the princess seam and then on the side seam to connect both of them. So we want to achieve the same looser feeling in the back by having the center back kind of as a straight, no, almost perfectly straight panel down, so everything, the seam is basically parallel to the center, but the shaping of the whole thing happens on this side. So we will pin both of those fabrics together at this princess seam. And we do not put it into the dress form, only the two fabric panels are pinned together. And the shaping happens on this side here. Be careful to not shape the center part too much. So then we double check, are my pins here, are my pins in the center, are they kind of parallel? I just go down with my finger. So that looks pretty parallel here. And are they more shaped and rounded when I look from the side panel? So, and on the side panel I see I started here and it goes all the way in and then a little out again. So that's perfectly what I wanted to achieve. At the same time, I keep this line here vertical, so it should not tilt in any way. Don't drag it over to the back or the front. So this is basically our grain line that should really stay straight. Then we can work on our armhole, same what we did in the front. So I start like about a centimeter into my metal plate here. And just start cutting around and snipping. It's always a little cut, a little snip, a little cut, a little snip, so that it shapes around that part. And then what we can do next is to pin together the side seam. Refill my pin cushion here. A few extra pins. It's always more pins than you think you need for those projects. Okay. So what we do on a side seam now is we also pin only the two fabrics together, not into the dress form. And the way to do is we pin the front over the back. So, and it's a weird angle. Usually I would do it from the other side, but for showing purposes here. And again, it should not be too tight. Don't make it all the way down to the dress form. We just want to be, like the side seam here is our reference. It's not where we have to be, but we have to be basically where the side seam is, but further away. This is the ease, the room that we need for breathing and eating and all that, and moving. And when you saw the photo of that dress, especially when you make a dress, you really want to have that room to breathe. So it is kind of tighter down here around the hips. So I might add a little extra here. And be sure to have the bust line like continuing. It should look like it's one continuous line here. It should not be that one line ends here and the next one is here, or one line is straight and then it tilts down. Like, make sure that it really goes around in one continuous line. So that's what we want. That's why we mark all those calico pieces. These are only our helping lines, our reference lines. I can remove one from the side from before. And then the top one from the armhole. Can also redo and connect it with my back. I am quite happy with this part here, but down here it is, I think it is a little too tight, so that's why I leave it open. I only like up to here. And what I will do to mark my piece here, that I might want to add maybe 1 centimeter to my fabric later when I cut it, or to my pattern, depends. If I want to cut it right from the calico onto a fabric, I will add that with the fabric. If I make a pattern, a paper pattern, because I want to make multiples of it, then I will add that centimeter to my paper. So plus 1 centimeter here and plus 1 centimeter here. And then I also mark where this addition will kind of start, and I kind of mark it right here, from here down. So then I know from here I start really shallow and I go out like kind of like a triangle piece that is about 1 centimeter wide at the bottom. So that's taken care of then. So now we have the last piece, and that is our back yoke. We do very similar like the front, and after that we will work on the shoulder. So again, I have the fold marked and pressed, and I have my additional helping line. That is the one from our neck, basically. A little higher, so you make sure that you are right on the center fold. And way too high. You know, my neckline is way higher. Sorry, I did not mark the back neckline, but it is basically where you have your, there is a little pin in your dress form, and it is about 1 inch down from the actual neck seam. So the neck seam and about 1 inch down, that is where our reference line should be. This is from another project, sorry about that. So we put this here where our seam is, matching the center. And we go further down here. Yeah, that's the problem when you have too many projects, then you have all different kinds of lines. So that's kind of a little dangerous. So, okay, and we want to have that line very like horizontal, parallel to every other line that we have, to our bust line or the line that I had from before. Like, lines should always be parallel. So unless you work on the bias and something unusual or asymmetric, then always make sure that you are parallel to here. So then we do the same thing what we did, the connection between my back yoke and my center and the side seam. So just fold the side seam or the princess seam sideways, and you can fold it either way, to the outside or the inside. It doesn't matter at this point. Later on you will trim it and you will press it, after stitching it together, and then you press it apart. So, but for now we are fine just folding it over this way or that way. So we start here in the center. I will use this as my reference line. So let's say this is my my stitch line, or the line where I want to have the seam in the end, this connection seam. So just moving this around, and I fold both of those seams together and pin them together, and put a pin into both of those fabrics, not into the dress form. So basically in the end we only have pins along our center line in the front and the back, and then we should be able to take this whole thing off the dress form. If you put too many pins into the dress form, then it's really difficult to remove it from the dress form and make a pattern out of it. So that's why, I'd rather put those pins from fabric to fabric. So then we have another one here. That's where we have basically 3 layers of fabric. So, and again I move this pin down a little further, just a centimeter or so. So I have a little more room above that pin to put my connection pin here. And again, the connection pin should be really straight over. So fold this over. Two pins in my hand. Okay. Second pin. And as we go sideways, I always make sure that my yoke here is really nice and smooth when it goes over towards the armhole. So my third one, this one, and then I can work on my armhole, on my neck, and then the shoulder. I really do those cuttings with a tiny little scissor because it's very easy to maneuver it around, versus the big scissors that it's a little tricky to do those cuts. So, and I also stay basically a centimeter into my metal, because I have not defined my arm shape yet. There's not much extra material here. Yeah, that's good. And then we do our neckline. Same thing, I have my neck line, which is also the seam on my dress form. I stay about a centimeter, this is the seam, and then I stay about a centimeter above it. Cut in and down. And it looks a little odd when you do that, but as you go, always cut and then snip down, and then you see how the fabric really, you can manipulate that fabric nicely over and around the neck. And so I have to be here with my back towards you to do the rest. So snipping around that neckline. So, and the last thing we need to do is our shoulder seam. So first let's double check all our lines, connections. It's good. So our last thing is the shoulder seam. And I don't know if you remember, I folded the shoulder just to the front before I did the back. So now I get it back up towards the shoulder, and I do the same with my back. So those two pieces will meet here at the shoulder, and it should be right on top of that seam from the dress form. And I brush my front yoke up and I brush my back yoke up, and then I pin the front over the back. This is a standard rule, like when you're on the side you pin the front over the back. When you do the shoulder you pin the front over the back. So okay, and I'll turn it around a little bit and I pin the two pieces together, not into my dress form. So I can remove it very easily. So what I can do now to make it a little easier and a little more obvious is cut the excess shoulder material here. That will also help us see better where we are with all our lines. So okay. So then what we want to do is having this loose enough, having that hang straight, all the vertical lines are vertical, all the horizontal lines are horizontal, so that's very important. And then we can define our neckline and the armhole line. And I will just maybe do that in a red, with a red tape. So this is an easy way to do it is with a tape. So you can tape it and retape it and figure it, you know, up until you're happy before you cut into your calico and then realize, oh, it's way too short or way too wide or way too wide open. So I want to make this into a sleeveless dress, so similar to the dress that we have on the that image that I gave you along with the calico measurements. So that would mean I have my armhole opening here, and that shows as the metal part of your dress form. So I will, this would be too tight. Like I have strong arms, so my armholes, I want them a little bigger. So I will go about an inch below that. And this is a reference that I just know from, you know, making many tops and dresses and whatnot. I always want to make my armhole a little bigger. If you're not sure, then just keep it simple and maybe go 1/4 of an inch around it, you know, a little further out than this one, the metal plate. And I'd rather not overdo it, because you can always make an armhole bigger. You can always cut a little more. And even on your finished dress, you know, you can always make it a little wider than it is, but you can never make it really smaller. Unless you, I don't know how to do it, you know. So let's just keep it very like according to your measurements, you know. And you know, do you have very thin, slim, slender arms, or are your arms a little stronger? So if they are stronger, give it an inch, and then you might still need to cut a little more. So, and what I do, I just start here on top, and I don't wanna have the armhole all the way out at the shoulder point. I want to have it a little further in. You know, like you can decide how wide you want to have the shoulder in the end. You don't have to be from shoulder point to neck point. This is more traditional, old-fashioned, you know. If you want a younger, hipper, more sexy style, then this goes smaller and smaller. So it's totally your choice. But you have to mark it and then cut it. And how I do it, I mark it around. And I just go over my folds and whatnot. And I know I want to be about an inch below. And then I want to get up in the back. So it meets at the top. Then I have a look from this side, you know, see if it's round enough from this side, if you really, if you're happy with the results, and I am not quite happy. With this part down here, I want this a little more rounded. And then I come up here, yeah, I like this better. And as I said, I can always make it wider. Okay, and now I want to define my neckline. And since, you know, I'm a minimalist, so I like things simple, and the rule is always, what can you take away to show what you really want to show? Do you need all that extra? Do you need all that, I call it schnickschnack, it's a typical German word. So what I want to show here in this top or in this dress is that combination of a yoke and the princess seam. So usually you have a princess seam that goes all the way up to the shoulder and all the way down to the back. So that's a classic princess seam. Or you have a yoke and then you have the front panel, but there's no side panel. So this top, the specialty or that extra in this top is that it has a yoke and a princess seam. So saying that is, I want to show that specialty, you know, like this yoke princess seam combination. And therefore, I don't want to add any other focus point, because if I add another focus point, then I take away from that special connection here. The more focus points you have, the more you wash down your design. And that is a typical minimalist approach. Do you really need this? Do you really need that? This detail, that detail, you know, do you need all that extra stuff? And most of the time you can say, no, not really, you know, I just overdid it. That saying, I want to keep my neckline very simple and just round and very basic. I don't want to make a very special, whatever, a deep cut V shape or a very, very wide cut round shape, or, you know, which would take the attention away from my specialty that I really want to show. So I will, as I said, keep it very simple, and knowing my neckline preferences, and I'm sure you have your neckline preferences. I don't want to be all the way up here. That is so grandmotherly in a way, you know. So I want to have a round neck that is not too deep down. So I will go from my neck point here that I marked and where I have the line, and go about an inch down. And from there, I try to create a nice round neckline. And that goes over the shoulders. I'll just press down the shoulder seam, and then I come back to the center back, and there I'm also like about an inch below that neck point. And again, you know, if you're not sure, keep it higher up and you can always cut it out and make it bigger. So let's see, it has kind of a weird... And you know, this is not the final result. I can always go in with my ruler, with my French curve, and even that out once it's on the flat surface on the table or on my cutting table. So this is basically a very simple way to show where my armhole would be, where my neck opening would be. This is still pretty wide, maybe even too wide for my taste, so I can always make it narrower. So, but first I want to see how the pattern works. I will base this together and put it on and see if the proportions are right, if the princess seam, and it's all about that yoke princess seam. Where are the seams, and is it really going over the high points really nicely and shaping around my body, but not too tight. So this is the whole agenda for this top. So I will yeah, I can cut it now around my proportions, you know, like leave a seam allowance around. I can do that on this side here, around the arm. I still leave about a centimeter, which is, as you know, the width of a finger, approximately. And I do the same around the neck. And this is a good way to do it now, because just in case the tape comes off while you take it off the dress form, then you still have the right measurements and everything. Okay. It's pretty good. So now I can try to take it off. Slowly remove all the pins in the center front. So then I have the tape here, so it should come off. There's one more here. But it still connects all those main parts. That is really what we want. So have all the main parts connected. Pins in the back. And there's one more pin. Okay. So I have all my pieces here. I have my pins in the right place. Just fold the tape over to the other side so it doesn't stick to anything else. Okay, perfect. So this is basically how you drape this kind of top. I will mark everything, baste it, and then try it on, and then make a paper pattern out of this, because I really like that style, and it's really nice as a top or as a dress. And the dress can be different length, you know, very short one with boots and funny stockings, or you can wear it longer or make a very long one that flares out or straight down. You know, if I would make a dress straight down, I would just continue with those, with the side panel and make that longer, and then center panel and make that longer. So, or have a seam right there. So endless possibilities. That's why I want to make a paper pattern out of this. So I hope you can do that, and good luck. And if you have any questions, please post those or ask them next time we are on our Zoom meeting.